Welcome to Mother, the show where we can explore our inner mothers to actualize our greatest selves. Through interviews with incredible guests, live coaching sessions, and my own experiences, we're going to dive deep into embracing feminine values and reparenting ourselves. So be prepared to show up, hold space, and be mothered in a way you never have before, but have always needed. It's time to rewrite the mother code. Well, I am beyond thrilled, delighted, and excited for this episode of Mother, Rewriting the Mother Code with me, Dr. Gertrude Lyons, that I have the honor and privilege to be speaking with, and you're all going to get to hear from Clark Strand and Perdita Finn. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on. I wished I'd had this show when I was a young mother. I just want to say thank you so much for it, how much you're bringing out there. So thank you.
I know. I kind of wish I had this for myself. But we found our way, didn't we? We found our way. All right. I'm going to share a little bit, some particulars about Clark and Perdita, and then we're going to launch in because there's so much great stuff to talk about. Okay. So I have Clark up first here. Clark is a writer, poet, environmentalist, teacher at a weekly haiku challenges, and columnist at Tricycle. That's all still valid, right? We're still
on those
things.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Written 7 books, as well as articles on a variety of religious, spiritual, and ecological themes. Has written for the Washington Post, Huffington Post, New York Times, Newsweek's On Faith blog, Tricycle, Body and Soul, Spirituality and Health, and many more. And Perdita is also an author, co-author with Suzanne Saxman of The Reluctant Psychic. Began her career as a writer, teaching, and also training teachers at Columbia University and helping students free their voices and tell their stories, which I love. Also written amazing children's books. You might have to mention some of the names of those as we go along because they're fantastic. And just has been creating empowering learning adventures in her life. She has a book that is coming out in the fall, September of 2023, Take Back the Magic, Getting to Know the Dead, a love story about the long story of our souls. And I'm super excited to read that. And I was sharing with Perdita and Clark that I was gifted. What I didn't mention were the names of 2 books that I think we'll probably mostly focus on in this episode, but who knows, where we'll go. But I particularly want to honor 2 of the books. They co-authored a book called The Way of the Rose, The Radical Path of the Divine Feminine, Hidden in the Rosary. There's a lot we want to talk about with that. And then also Clark, one of his books is Waking Up to the Dark, The Black Madonna's Gospel for an Age of Extinction and Collapse. And there's some really juicy, beautiful stuff in there. So many ways we could go, but I'd love to just hear the 2 of you. I just said all these things about you, and the things that you wrote, but your life is just, you share so much in your books about your path and individually, but then the intersection as your couple, for how these books came to be born and came to life. So I personally don't know where to start. So I'm hoping you can just pick up anywhere with that for the 2 of you and your journey, and we'll start there.
Well, I'll share with a dream I had 25 years ago and that you may relate to. I was a young mother. I had 2 children. We were working at home, but working full time. And when you're a mom, you're working 3 full-time jobs simultaneously, parents and young parents. And we were looking for spiritual community. And we'd both been involved in Buddhism, but the kids had to go be outside of the experience. The kids were always being relegated to the back room. And ultimately we left and we ended up at the Episcopal Church. And again, the kids were relegated to the back room, and Buddhist that I'd been, of course, I was teaching Sunday school.
Yes.
And I wanted an experience with the children. I didn't want to be apart from my kids on Sunday. I wanted an experience that integrated them. And I kept having a vision of a group I called in my imagination Mothers Without Borders, where we'd get together as parents to support each other in the business of parenting through prayer. And that group didn't happen. I didn't have a container for it. That group now exists. And it's The Way of the Rose, which is this group Clark and I started 12 years ago. And it is a non-denominational, fairly feral group devoted to the earth,
Yeah.
and the lady by any name you like to call her, and the Rosary. And we pray the Rosary together, which is our container. But people come from all different traditions. And they come from Jewish traditions and Catholic and Buddhist and nothing and witches. And we have young people and old people, and grandmothers bring their grandchildren and grandchildren bring their grandmothers.
I love
And we
it.
come together to pray the Rosary together.
Mm.
And suddenly we have that container, and a lot of young moms come and they can bring their, and a lot of young parents are there. And, we need a lot more hands in the room for young
Yeah.
parents. So that's the
Absolutely.
encapsulation of our 30-year journey.
Yes. No, and I love that was because your journey's so rich, and how from Buddhism to Episcopalian, but everything in between, and how you were raised, and that you landed here. I know you speak, often of like the Rosary. What? Like I'm being guided to like, no, what is that? And one of you would kind of pick it up and then the other. And, I just love that.
Neither of us was raised Catholic. It's important to know that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we weren't raised Buddhists. We embraced Buddhism later on in life. But I grew up a Southern Protestant where there was basically no divine feminine.
No,
The Virgin Mary was a Galilean housewife at best, right?
Right.
She got trotted out once a year and placed on, the church front lawn as part of the crèche scene. That was about it. So I didn't have any experience of that, and I got involved in Zen Buddhism in my late teens. And Zen was an unapologetically patriarchal religion that actually spoke with pride of its patriarchs, and where women were almost never mentioned.
Yeah.
And I did that for most of my early, spiritual career. So by the time we came to Our Lady and the Rosary, I had no preparation for that whatsoever. It came completely out of left field for me.
Which
I had
I
actually
love.
been praying the Rosary. My forebears were Irish Catholics, and there are a lot of, Boston Irish Catholics in my family, although my parents were avowed atheists and wouldn't even let my grandmother take us to church. So, which of course makes it all very tantalizing.
Yes. What is this hidden thing I'm not allowed to do?
And I had converted to Catholicism for about 15 minutes in my early 20s, but I couldn't. In fact, it was this social justice issues really appealed to me and really did influence me. And I met some extraordinary men and women involved in social justice work, but I did not stay there. And it was a lot of it because I had mystical yearnings that did not feel satisfied. Yeah. And Clark, the Buddhist, I always say that I have a faithful husband who is promiscuous spiritually.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I was very, very faithful to Zen for like 14 years from the time I was 19 until I was like 33. But once, Zen spit me out the other side of itself. Spiritually restless, I think, would be, very mild way of describing me. I studied everything.
Yeah, deeply.
Rabbis, and Zen masters, and priests, and gurus just coming to the house constantly.
And I don't mean he would go deep. Like he would be going down to study with the Hasidic rabbis, and then the next day he'd be meeting with someone for the Jehovah's Witness to do Bible study. I mean, I didn't know what to make of the whole thing.
Guilty as charged. Well, here's the thing. It took a long time to realize what was going on, but having experienced, first as a Zen Buddhist monk and later as an editor for Tricycle, the Buddhist Review, having experienced sort of the modern collapse of patriarchy and religious patriarchy, instead of like coming out of that experience as a Zen Buddhist monk and teacher in 1990 and saying, oh, there must be something other than that, I spent 20 years trying to get it right. So every single tradition I studied for 20 years was was just really more of the same. And, it didn't occur to me that there was, the subtitle for The Way of the Rose is The Radical Path of the Divine Feminine Hidden in the Rosary. Well, it was hidden all right, because I certainly
I knew that.
But as a young mother, overwhelmed as you are, and you worry, it becomes your job, right? And I found myself, Clark taught me to pray the Rosary, and it was something to hold on to.
Yes.
And it was literally like you're in the ER with a child in the middle of the night. You're not going to follow your breath. You're going to hold on and say, Mama, help me.
Yeah.
Make sure
Hear,
my
hear.
kid's okay, right?
Mhm.
And I found myself, and I had no idea, Gertrude, how to explain to anybody else what I was doing. I kept saying, how can I,
Oh,
an ex-Buddhist, feminist, find everything I need? And the amazing thing was, I would go to bed, I would put the kids to bed at night, and I would be praying the rosary, and I'd be holding the beads, and they would be holding my hair. You know the way children play with your
yes. They
hair?
reach up and yep.
And I realized what they're doing with my body is what I'm doing with the body of the mother,
Yes.
and that we're feeling. And my own mother during this time when my children were young came to live with us. She was dying,
Mm,
and so I was caring for young children and a dying mother, and I needed a mother in the room.
Hear, hear.
And, my koan, in Zen, there's a koan, a riddle that's given to you to sort of break open your reality. And my koan that I gave myself was Mother of God.
Mm.
So take God, take this abstraction that we don't know how to get our hands around, and give God a mother. And that broke me open.
Now, Perdita
And-
talks about me teaching her the Rosary.
Yeah.
So I actually, the Rosary is one of the things I studied, like in this endless crusade through the religions of the world,
Yeah.
basically looking for something to
Right.
make the world gone mad, right? A
Mm.
world on the midst
Sure.
of species extinction and climate collapse and all of that. And so, I discovered the Rosary on a teaching trip to the Southwest in Taos, New Mexico. I kept
Oh,
seeing
yes.
images
Please
maybe of
tell this story.
Guadalupe
Yes. Yes.
everywhere, right?
Yep.
It
Yep.
And
was her feast day 2 days
it was-
ago, too.
that's right.
Oh, it is. Yes.
Yeah, on December 12th.
Yep.
So I came back from that encounter where I saw images of her everywhere. I really had no idea who I was looking at. There was this, I thought of her as a young Mexican girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but I came back from that trip feeling like I needed to learn to pray the rosary. And if I remember correctly, Perdita met me with the kids at the airport, and one of the first things I said was, "I've got to learn how to pray the rosary." And her mouth fell open.
I
thought,
think
oh,
you've dropped a
no,
few.
not that, please.
Not this again.
Please,
You've dropped
no.
a few of these kind of bombs on her. We're going to talk about a couple of them.
Yes. He has a
So,
habit of doing that.
but I
Yes.
did. I taught myself to say the rosary. And, any 8-year-old with a diagram can learn it, like in an afternoon. I mean, that's the beauty of it. It's so simple. So I started praying it, and a strange thing happened. I found myself getting into the deepest places like I had ever experienced as a cloistered Zen Buddhist monk in a remote
Wow.
monastery, like where it would take me 4 or 5 days to get in that place of, that deep a quiet and a sense of peace. And so I told myself after, I want to say 2 weeks, oh, this is definitely a placebo. Like I am totally talking myself into this. There's no way that
This is
sitting
happening. How
there
can
like
this be
some
happening?
old grandmother with a bunch of
Yes.
beads and mumbling prayers is actually
Doing
creating
something.
this
Yeah.
experience, right? I'm just completely talking myself. So I quit. And then what, a year or so later, we were on some long drive and coming down a hill. Perdita doesn't do well with heights. So
Mm.
coming down a hill in the mountains, and she turned to me and she said, "Teach me the rosary."
Oh,
And I
wow.
was sort of stunned. I
Goosebumps.
thought, well, I remembered how to do it, so I taught her. Of course, it connected with her instantly. She has it in her DNA. And so she started praying, and she prayed it for years
By myself.
by herself
And the kids.
and with the
Kids played with
kids.
me.
The
Oh,
kids
with the
grew up with
kids.
it. Meanwhile,
Okay.
I'd moved on to tons of other things. So it was only after about 10 years that I came back to it.
This isn't in the book, but it's something I realized after we wrote the book. And about that feeling of peace that comes to you at the rosary, and it might be in to people, particularly our mothers. A question I began to ask is, why are beads so ubiquitous in religious traditions around the world?
Yep.
And they are. Every religion has a tradition of using beads for prayer. But even older than that, human beings have been making beads as long as we've been human beings. They found beads that are over 120,000 years old in Morocco. And making beads is not easy. Like it takes a lot of work to fashion a bead from stone or shell. And probably they're beads made from wood and clay that are older than that. But I would ask your viewers to take, if you've got a button or a necklace or any kind of bead, and to roll it between your thumb and forefinger and begin to notice how it begins to make you feel. Because that's the secret behind the rosary. which is there is something about that gesture which is profoundly comforting.
Mm-hmm.
And we might call it fidgeting. But it's a kind of fidgeting that is so primarily consoling. And what I realized with this aha moment, I kept going, what is it? Why does it make me feel so good to pray the rosary? Why do I love it so much?
Yeah.
And one day when I was praying, oh, it's the same feeling I had nursing my children.
Mm.
And in fact, that gesture of holding the bead is the gesture the baby makes to the nipple when they're first born.
Love that.
And what happens when the baby holds the nipple is that a hormone called prolactin lets down both in the mother's body and in the child's body to create that cocooned feeling of calm and peace. It's the same hormone that, birds get when they sit on their eggs. We know that feeling, right? If you've nursed a child, it's really that's the feeling Clark was experiencing.
Yeah. And much of that other book that you mentioned, Waking Up to the Dark, much of the earlier parts of that book deal with a study conducted at the National Institute of Mental Health in the mid-90s about sleep, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you guys are going everywhere I want to go.
Yeah.
So please. This is so perfect. Yeah. Please go into that because this really,
Well, it's very intimately related to the Rosary, and Lady of the Black Madonna, and Sleep in Darkness. So this researcher named Thomas Ware had a question. This was the guy who discovered seasonal affective disorder, right? He was a
I didn't realize.
He was a heavy-hitting, medical researcher, and he got very curious. He wondered, do modern human beings sleep the way prehistoric humans slept? And he began to think about how slowly our bodies and our DNA change, right? That we're basically hardwired in certain ways that the modern world overrides. So he asked the question, did human beings sleep longer? Did they sleep better? Did they sleep differently before the introduction of what he called light-assisted wakefulness? So he took a group of people off the streets of Bethesda, Maryland, just ordinary people, and he took them off of all forms of artificial illumination, artificial lighting for 30 days. And for the first 3 weeks of that time, mostly they just slept about an hour, hour and a half longer, repaying what we're called the national sleep debt, right? Because Americans are so chronically sleep deprived, right? We don't give ourselves comfort. We don't take care of our bodies. We don't give ourselves time in the dark, time for dreams and imagination, intimacy, touch, all of those things.
I'm really getting what a big deal this is from your book, but keep going. Yeah.
So he took them off of all forms of electrical light. For 3 weeks, they just slept more. After 3 weeks, every subject in the study started waking up after 4 hours for 2 hours of what we're at first just called quiet rest before falling asleep again for another 4 hours. Now, here's the really interesting thing. Those people described themselves as having an experience of peace that they had never known before during those 2 hours. And so Ware thought, he's a scientist, he's a psychobiologist. So he says, well, let's see what's going on in their bloodstream. So he gave them a hormonal panel and discovered that the hormone prolactin,
that's the same one I was talking about,
which lets down in nursing mothers, which keeps birds roosting on their nests and keeps mammals still when they're asleep, right? So they don't move around too much. He discovered that the hormone prolactin, rather than falling as it normally does in people when they wake up, once you gave people enough time in the dark, their prolactin levels would remain elevated throughout those 2 hours. Wow. And there's a famous line from the Book of Psalms, or I'm sorry, not the Book of Psalms, but the Song of Songs, so the great love poem of the Bible, the erotic love poem of the Bible. The lover says, I sleep, but my heart is awake. And I always thought of that as just poetry, but it's actually a description of a state of mind. And that's the state of mind that people get into when they meditate, when they pray the rosary, when they nurse, when they just lie on the bed in the middle of the day and daydream for half an hour. That is that ancient place of peace and renewal that was once basically a middle of the night meditation retreat for every Homo sapiens on Earth.
That everybody had it. So that's why everyone's searching for like that time, right? And how do we get it? And you mentioned meditation when it was just a natural part of our daily,
I think
cycle,
for our
right?
grandmothers, for our ancestral grandmothers, that practice of holding the beads and muttering prayers, which, you mentioned your grandfather prayed the rosary. A lot of those old rosary prayers had the rosary in their pocket. They didn't go off on a fancy retreat to get this experience.
No.
They just reached into their pocket and it was instantly available to them.
And it was
to drop into that place.
And it was family centered, like it took place in the home. It wasn't, there was, prior to like Vatican II, the reforms of Vatican II and the Catholic Church in the mid 1960s, the locus of the spiritual life was in the home. And so people would pray the rosary often as families. Mothers would pray them with their children, like Perdita did with our children growing up. Fathers and grandfathers would come in to say the rosary. So people were having this experience without any kind of patriarchal, authoritarian, priestly oversight, right? No one's like
telling you how to do
down
it,
their neck, telling them how to do it or how to interpret the experiences that they were having.
My father, who was a very fierce atheist, he'd been raised in an immigrant family and had that kind of attitude you have of wanting to be more American and
break free,
more modern. And he was a doctor, and he always tell disparaging the story of one of his many sisters being sick with pneumonia and his mother gathering all the children around the bed to pray the rosary. And he said, oh my God, can you imagine, what did she think she was doing? Well, she didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And there were no
antibiotics in the 1930s.
No Advil.
And her daughter was dying of pneumonia. And I will just only add that little girl is still alive at 96 today. And that worked. Whatever was going on there was all the
that. She was the longest lived of how many children?
6, yeah.
6.
So she got those doses, right? Yeah.
But I think that the disparaging of this seemingly ordinary magic, and I'll use the word magic, which was often available to women or people who didn't have any other resources. And, people who don't have money, don't have access to healing, they often understand the power of prayer in a way we have forgotten.
And this is what I found so stirring. I was saying before started recording, that reading, Way of the Rose, I love because it brought me back, to the rosary. And as I mentioned, the connection with my grandfather, both my grandmother and grandfather. Now they didn't, I only remember a few times where we prayed it together. And one time was when my mom was having a biopsy, for cancer and stuff. So we got down. I remember being kind of like, okay, say the rosary. So, I could see the impact, but I always knew they were doing it. Right. And my grandma died when I was 9 and I had a really strong connection with her and it was really hard to lose her. And I took her namesake. So I was raised Trudy. That was my given name, but her name was Gertrude. And my mom, so in my 30s, like what I've realized more recently, I think it was more out of fear in my new motherhood. Like I wanted her with me, right? I wanted her. I was claiming on the outside, like it's more, it's claiming my more mature womanhood than Trudy, right? Like, so I'm going from Trudy to Gertrude, but there was also just a cry to be like, have my grandma connected to me. But my grandfather, very, I can really only remember a handful of like actual conversations with him. He was this quiet man that was always saying the rosary, it was always in his pocket and, he'd walk with it, just everything, you're describing. And it was, just how I knew him. And it wasn't until I was an adult and I went to visit him. He was leaving his place. He lived to 98. He lived alone until he was 95. And so he was leaving his place in Florida to come, move to assisted living up in Michigan. And I wanted to go say goodbye to that place and just be with him, and I had just started my own growth and spiritual journey. So I'm a little more attuned and aware at that point. And I asked him, I said, Grandpa, like what, you say the rosary all the time, what are you praying for? He's like, well, I'm praying for you. And I burst into tears, just started sobbing at the realization that I've had, this somebody praying for me every day. I had my own personal prayer. He was so sweet. He's like, "You're crying." I'm like, "Yeah, I
I'm
am,"
crying.
because this was
I
so
have two
moving.
I have two rosaries I pray with,
Mm.
and I have two children, and I imagine myself as filling them with prayers that one day will
Oh
go to
my
you,
gosh.
that they can pass on. And I think, I do believe objects hold those prayers for us. And
Hmm.
it's really powerful. It's one thing for someone to say, "Oh, you're in my thoughts and prayers," and that feels like prayer suddenly feels less than a thought, right?
Right.
Like something a little. When someone says, "I'm going to sit down and pray the rosary for you," you go,
Right.
"Okay."
A
Yeah.
whole rosary. Yes.
And
So beautiful.
that's the thing about the rosary too, is that the rosary is that's what it's for. I mean, you get the benefits of, a meditative practice, right? A contemplative practice. You
Hmm.
certainly do, but it's not the point of the rosary. The point of the rosary is to pray for our heart's desire.
Mm.
And, this was a tradition that was alive in the Catholic Church for centuries, and only recently, what discouraged. There was a practice which we continue on Way of the Rose that was just a development of a medieval practice called the 54-day novena, where a
Oh.
person would pray the rosary for 54 days, okay, in order to obtain some sort of grace or petition or favor. And so, they would say the rosary, the sorrowful mysteries one day, the joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mysteries alternating for 54 days straight. And for the first 27 days,
Mm.
they would pray in petition. And for
Oh,
the last
wow.
7 days, they would pray in thanks, whether the prayer had been answered yet or not. And
Oh,
so it was sort
wow.
of leaning into that possibility.
Yeah.
And this is what we do perpetually on Way of the Rose. And people will come to our group, who like their grandmother was Catholic or something like that. And they'll tell their grandmother, yeah, I'm part of this group. We pay the 54-day novena. And the grandmothers would say, yeah, I've been praying 54-day novenas for you since you were born.
But we need to find our way back to it, right? And that's how I feel. And your book came at just, always things like this come at the right time. I was sharing that The Way of the Rose was sent to me by who's now a very dear friend, but at that time I knew as the midwife. I met her because she was a midwife of my two daughters. So we've connected around birth and motherhood, but not so much Mary. So that a new twist on it. But I went seeking my grandfather's rosary. He was buried with his rosary, but I had given him a rosary, so that was still available. And I've since I have more. I keep them by my bed. I I sleep with it. I stay, and I've had a few times where I'm trying to sleep and that anxious feeling comes, and I would hold it and would go away. It would.
It's what happens. Clark and I go
Yeah,
to bed praying the rosary, and one of us always falls asleep before we get
sure.
to the end.
Yeah, we almost never finish it together. Actually, if we both finish and we're both awake, we've learned that it's a sign that we need to talk about something.
Yeah,
Because one of us just
it's
trusts the
keeping us
other.
awake.
One of
But
us
we
falls
once had
asleep.
pre-COVID had an in-person rosary circle here where we live in Woodstock, and we had a newcomer come. It was her first time coming to the rosary, and it was about 10 or 12 people who were there praying the rosary. We got to the third mystery, the third decade, the middle of the rosary, and this woman described everyone in the room falling asleep, and
Like
she didn't know
within
what to do.
seconds of one
Within
another,
seconds, she realized everyone was asleep in the room
except her.
except her. And so she just started saying the prayers very quietly and didn't know what to do and felt very embarrassed. And we got to the end of the 10th Hail Mary, and everybody woke up and continued praying the rosary. And she said it was like magic. And I said that's the rosary brings you into these deep, relaxed places. And in fact, what people often find is it brings such rest and such ease that you do find yourself falling asleep. We always say it's a good thing. You'll come out of it. I often will find myself, 2 hours later, Clark and I will say, well, I'm going to go have a rosary nap.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
The rosaries of prayer it is specifically designed by our medieval forebears to ease us into what some people would call a liminal state, like
Mm.
somewhere between dreaming and waking.
That space in the middle of
That
the night.
space in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
It's a visionary place where we get messages and we feel comfort and connection,
Yeah.
and true rest. And so the way the rosary is set up is you have alternating Our Fathers and Hail Marys. There's one Our Father for every 10 Hail Marys. So the Our Father is not really a mantra. It's a sort of a wakeful sort of prayer. You're praying
Hmm.
for, forgiveness and for daily bread and for safety and good relations with other people and a wholesome relationship to the planet, basically in that prayer. Then you say these 10 Hail Marys and you tend to go really deep. It's a sleepy prayer. It's
Hmm.
a mantric prayer that really relaxes the body and slows the breathing. And sometimes you'll actually fall sound asleep in those 10 prayers. It takes about maybe 5 minutes tops, 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how fast you say it, to say 10 Hail Marys. And you can fall sound asleep in that time and then come back up. The next Our Father, it's like that comes along, as you make your way through the mysteries, is like a bell that goes
Hmm.
off to sort of wake you up and make you resurface.
I think there's something, I think that being able to hold on, we've gotten a lot of faux Buddhism about letting go.
Hmm.
And what we want to do is we want to feel held and we want to hold. Babies want to be held, right? Babies that aren't held die.
They need to be. Yeah,
They
exactly.
have to
They
be
have to
held
be.
and we have to be held. And
Yeah.
we're primates. And primates,
Right.
if you go look at them, are holding each other all the time. And I think I think at its most fundamental, we begin to feel held by the whole cosmos.
Mm.
And that there is to feel held by our mother and to know she's really got us. We can exhale.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have to help each other remember it. That's why it's nice to have
I
Rosary.
do. Right. To do it together and in community the way you are. I love that.
I became obsessed about 10 or 12 years ago with finding what I thought of as the origin of the rosary. Like, where does it really
Yeah.
begin?
Right.
We can go back and we can say that, some form of the rosary as we prayed it today was being prayed 1,000 years ago, probably even earlier than that. But if you go back further and further and further, you find out something very interesting. Perdita and I, as part of our research for Way of the Rose, we traveled to southern France where we went and we did two things basically. Went to see Black Madonnas, right?
I
Those
love.
old
Yeah.
statues, beautiful old statues
Talk
that
about that some more.
are so old and are generally black or very dark in color, and so old that they could simply be statues of Isis that were reappropriated by early Christians in France.
One of the things that's fascinating about them, we discovered a lot of people have become re-interested in the Black Madonnas.
Hmm.
And the sites of them were often places of devotion that were hundreds of thousands of years
Yeah,
old.
yeah,
So that Lourdes, we think of Lourdes, right? Lourdes was a place where they found Paleolithic devotion going
yeah.
way back.
Right.
So the lady is appearing to Bernadette there.
In what's kind of a trash, it's like almost like a trash heap area
It was a trash
at
heap.
the time, right?
It was the rubbish. It was
It
was the rubbish.
she appeared in the rubbish. And I always thank you for bringing that up. That's one of my favorite details.
Yeah.
And Bernadette was treated as rubbish in that culture too.
She was.
Yep.
She was poor,
She was
semi-literate,
poor and not
and
considered
not healthy. Yeah.
Illiterate, so
illiterate and not taken
didn't even
serious.
understand the words that Mary was saying to her. It was.
And I always remember, when the lady first appeared to her, her mother slapped her, and said, just, snap out of it.
Mhm.
But that was a place of devotion.
It was.
And when we went, one of my favorite Black Madonnas is Our Lady of Rocamadour in France. And she's this skinny little old Black Madonna. And she's just a powerhouse.
She is. She's like a crone Madonna.
But there is a cave. There's a cave there with cave art 20,000 years old, right?
Yeah.
Behind her.
Right. Oh, that's a coincidence, right?
Coincidence. And there is found evidence of hominid remains from 300,000 years ago.
Wow.
To this spot, you're there, you're somewhere our ancestors have been going to have an encounter with the divine for as long as we've been human beings.
One of the things we discovered, we had this wonderful book written by a man who is a wonderful mentor for us, who's since passed on. Ian Begg wrote a book called The Cult of the Black Virgin, which is to this day the single best book about the Black Madonna. And half of that book is incredibly scholarly, erudite, well-researched ramblings on Black Madonna. But the whole last half of it is nothing but meticulous descriptions of each Black Madonna he visited. And he and his wife, Dike, visited them all. and the
Wow.
legends associated with them, the descriptions of them, and all that. It's a kind of a gazette. What we discovered was that if you took the maps in that book and you superimposed them over maps showing where Paleolithic goddess figurines had been discovered, they matched up almost perfectly.
All right.
And
Well,
so these Black Madonnas, right? The places where people were devotion to these chthonic dark earth mothers was the strongest, was places where that figure had been venerated for tens of thousands of years. The wonderful thing about these statues, which Perdita is always pointing out, is they're all quite small.
yeah.
Right? Their body types are varied. Some
I mean,
look
it's
like
the Paleolithic,
birds.
not the Black Madonnas, the
No,
Paleolithic
the
figure.
Paleolithic
Mhm.
goddess figurines from the Upper Paleolithic. These little stone or clay figurines are quite small, but they're all meant to be held in the hand.
Yes.
And that
Not
was
put up on a pedestal, right?
that's
They're
right.
No.
They were portable, right?
Yeah.
And people carried them with them. And what we discovered was that these really were like the first rosaries. These were
Yes.
people's first experiences of creating something that they could hold themselves in the way that they felt held by the earth,
Mm.
that they felt held by their mother.
Mhm.
So the experience of holding these figurines, which are found all across the world, only female figures, no male. They're all female mother figures. The experience of holding these was much like the experience of holding the rosary today. There's tremendous comfort
Comfort, right?
holding, but also the feeling of being held at the same time.
Hi, I'm so excited to share with you my 2024 Spring Equinox Self-Mothering Retreat that's happening this March 2024. And I would love for you not only to consider it, but to attend. But in considering it, hey, just knowing that you would be leaving cold weather, if that's the space that you're in, and coming down to just magnificently beautiful, warm, nourishing place of Zihuatanejo, Mexico. Zihuatanejo meaning land of the goddess women, and coming to really take time for yourself. Okay. And that I am learning more and more isn't just a nice thing to do or something extravagant or something selfish. It's essential. And I really want you to take it seriously, to consider, just think about what would it take for me to go. It's a 5.5-day retreat, getting from where you are, getting there, landing there, and then being in a space that is all about you. It's all about nourishing you. It's all about tuning into you, using everything around us, the nature, the food, the beautiful people, the rituals, ceremonies. I bring it, we really bring it. And we go deeper and deeper as the days go on, and we release, we let go, we bring in what is nourishing, what is empowering, what is that space of just really divine feminine energy. And we do it in the community of women. It's not for everyone. I will be honest, if the idea of leaving and not making it work, or it's just too hard, not for you. If the idea of, spending that amount of time inwardly focused and going to that level of self-awareness doesn't sound like something you're willing to do or put the time and energy into, then it's not for you. And it's good to know that, right? So this is for people who are serious about what it means to mother themselves, what it means to take time for ourselves, and that gift and what that gift can bring to us. It was originally right after my fall retreat. It filled right up. But now some people, it turns out, are not able to come. So I do have a handful of openings. And if you're listening to this and you're willing to take that step, please reach out to me. We can do a discovery call, or you can put a deposit down. I would love that. And you can do that by going to my website, www.drgertrudelyons.com. Go to events, and there you go. It'll all be there. There's a beautiful page there for you to explore. I look forward to hearing from you and then seeing you on my spring retreat. That's so beautiful. And I think that's what we're seeking, right? And what's been lost, but we're finding ways to find it. And I think that's, I know we're in this, age of extinction and collapse and upset. but following this yearning, of being held, holding, I know, Perdita, you were saying you were grateful for my work, and the work of like women reacquainting themselves with the power of mother, and not from a masculine perspective of a job to do, but a space to hold, because the way the great mother, our mother, has been holding it for us and continues no matter what we do.
A question I always have is mothers feel so isolated in our culture, and I don't think they've ever been more burdened than they are right now.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by what it was like to be a mother in those Paleolithic goddess devoted times. Was it like when everyone experienced themselves as the mother of a child who was born into a community, and when there were enough mothers to go around, when there were aunts and grandmothers in the house? And it was one of those things, like, we think that the male spiritual practices are better sometimes. They look so macho, right? Like, I say this because I, did Zen retreats and sat ramrod straight and didn't move all day. And to discover that my grandmother held the magic beans, and they really are like magic beans, that she knew how, very modest woman, right? But she knew how to put food on the table when there was no money. She knew how to make healing happen when there was medicine, right? And that humdrum, ordinary, banal magic is what we need more than ever right now. We need to feel held by that community of mothers, not just among the living, but among the dead. And what would it mean? I think what the lady wants us, the Rosary has a set of 15 mysteries, and people often are turned off by that who come to the Rosary because they think it's kind of like very pious and Christian. I'm like, oh no, I'm not going back to, catechism school.
There are episodes from the life of Mary and Jesus that come mostly from the Gospels. And so they look very religious on the surface.
Sure.
Except that they're connected to the ancient mystery cults of the Mediterranean. And rather than telling the story of the Bible or Jesus, they actually tell the story of a woman becoming a mother, losing her child, and resurrecting him. And wow, and that's an initiation for everybody.
Yes.
Into what is it? I mean, and really it's an invitation for everyone, male and female, young and old, to think about what would it be? What am I giving birth to?
Right.
What am I birthing into the world?
And that story is superimposed over a much older story that was told in these ancient mystery cults about the death and rebirth of the land, right? Through the 4 seasons, story of Demeter and Persephone, and it goes on, and the descent of Inanna. There are endless myths that predate Christianity and Judaism that describe this cycle that people could witness, just by following the seasons of growth, fruition, death and harvest, decay and rebirth in spring. The Rosary tells that same story, but it superimposes it over the lifetime of a woman and her son, so that it feels very, very personal.
Yeah.
Modern Christians don't really connect to this very much because they tend to deny the pagan roots of Christianity. But roots are what nourish a plant. Totally. Cut yourself off from the root, that's a dead tree. So the only these traditions are, if they're rerouted or rewilded, right, they regain their vitality.
Yeah, and I thank you. This is we're not done. I'm just saying thank you for what we've said, what we've talked about, so far. But something you were just saying about, because I was raised Catholic, and everything was just rote. I can't say I ever felt really connected anywhere within it until as an adult, and I started on my own spiritual journey that, I left Catholicism behind, and I don't know, spiritual seeker, the whatnot. And part of that was going on spiritual pilgrimages every year with a non-denominational group and whatnot. So I've visited Our Lady of Rocamadour, and and Mary apparition sites all over Europe, but particularly the Black Madonna, and Spain outside of Barcelona. Why am I forgetting her name?
Montserrat.
Montserrat. Yeah.
Oh,
she was
he's one
another
of my
huge
favorites.
favorite. I know, right? Like, isn't it funny? Like these
Yeah.
favorites,
Wonderful.
but and like undeniable experiences, feelings at Lourdes, like the
Oh,
miracle of that water is,
Yeah.
something, but my connection there with people. So I've felt this now, and I'm mad at the church for having a whole upbringing, and I didn't even know these places existed, and I went to Catholic school and high school and college. How could I get through all of that and not know are these beautiful places? And Catholics are a little more acclimated to Mary. They haven't
Yeah.
completely ousted her, but that all of this is happening. And to me, those places give hope because everybody comes from all walks of life, and for healing, whether it's physical or mental or spiritual, and coming together in those spaces. And like you said, that are spaces that have been venerated, acknowledged, whether it's earth energy lines. I don't know what brought
Well,
people there to begin with.
I will say that, as you know, our devotion to the Rosary really came into flowering with our own experience of the presence of the Lady and an apparition
Which I
here.
was hoping we could still get to today.
Yes. And I will just say that where we live, our little house in the Catskill Mountains, is a site right behind our house, our cairns that may be 5,000 or 6,000 years
No
old. And
way.
the
Yeah.
indigenous people did not live in Woodstock where we live. They came here out of devotion, and the cairns mirror the constellation Draco in the sky. And so we're in the center of that, our actual house. So the appearance of the Lady here it's like she appears as the land. The land
Mm,
itself
is her.
is
Yeah.
her.
Hmm.
You are meeting the mother directly, the mother as the earth. And she has different feelings. Like Montserrat doesn't feel like Rocamadour, right? It's a different,
Mm-mm.
and just like the land is
They're all
different.
different. Yeah. And
And they're
I've,
all different ladies, and we love them. I always say, like, suddenly when there's a mother in charge of the world, there are enough mothers to go around.
Yeah.
There are mothers everywhere you look.
And we
yes.
have a shrine to the apparition here on our property out by the road, shrine to Our Lady of,
Oh,
as she likes to be called. And
I'm
because
sorry.
she,
Could you say the name again?
Our Lady of Woodstock. We live in
Oh,
Woodstock, New York, and
okay.
she can take the name of places where she appears. And so there's a statue at the end of our driveway, a life-size statue of her. And people come from all over the world to pray and to
Mm.
ask for graces and favors, and then in healings, and then to come back when their prayers are answered.
And we have a
To
book
trust.
filled with the miracles that have already happened there that are
Okay. I
extraordinary.
didn't know this aspect. I only knew of you. Now, Clark, did this start out of you were the original visitation, right? Can you share
Yes.
about that? Yeah.
Yeah, the
Such a
in
beautiful story.
2011, on the night of June 15th, we went out to dinner. We came home. There was a lunar eclipse just before that. I went to bed as I normally do. I woke up 4 hours later to go for my walk in the middle of the night, which is something I wrote about in Waking Up to the Dark,
Hmm.
and I've been doing my whole life. And I put my hand on the doorknob to leave the house, and I felt a hand on my right shoulder, and a male voice said, "Don't go out tonight. Remain inside and be very, very still." So I'm not a person who had heard voices. In fact, my Zen training had told me that all experiences like, locutions, hearing voices, having visions, anything paranormal was called makio, or illusion. And you were just
Oh.
simply supposed to meditate straight through it, right? Just bulldoze it right over and suppress it, right? Zen
Mm.
teaches suppression of those sorts of experiences. So, and I had, been a Zen teacher, so I trained other people to do that. So, but something about this, I just didn't feel that I could ignore it. So I didn't go out that night, even though it was very beautiful. I got on the couch, and I've been a Zen monk. I knew how to get very still. So I did it. And after about 45 minutes, I could feel someone with me in the room. Even though we were in our house, door was closed, no one else here, Perdita and the kids upstairs asleep. And I opened my eyes, and it was like I was in the middle of a marsh. All I
Mm.
saw was just darkness and two reed stalks blowing. And then the reed stalks vanished, and in their place was the face of a young girl, about maybe 17 years old. Her face was roundish, her skin was pale. She had auburn hair and hazel eyes, and she had an X of black electrical tape over her mouth. And I looked at her, and my first thought was, oh, yeah, Makia, right? Makia, this is illusion. And so I looked at her for all of about 3 seconds, and then my Zen career formally ended that night in that instant, because I thought, oh,
Yeah.
the Zen masters were like totally wrong. Like, she's not illusion. If there's an illusion here, it's me, not her.
Yeah.
She's
Wow.
real. The whole world might be unreal, but she would be real. So I did what anyone, I think, in that set of circumstances would do. She clearly had not put the tape on herself. She clearly needed it off. So I leaned forward and I pulled the tape off of her mouth. I could feel the resistance of her skin against it as I pulled. And when I did that, she gave a huge gasp, like she hadn't been able to breathe. Or I described it in the book as like a crypt being unsealed after thousands of air rushing into a vast space. It didn't fit the size of her body. And then I opened my mouth to say the obvious question, who are you? But she shook her head, saying, no, nothing can be said now. So I just looked at her. I don't know for how long,
Mm.
just just me and her right there. And then the Zen monk part of my brain won out again. And I shut my eyes and went back to meditating. When I opened them 45 minutes later, she was gone. But I woke up the next morning and I turned the whole house over looking for the electrical tape. I was sure I would find it. The experience had been so real. And I continued to feel her presence. And later that year, she began to speak. Later that summer, she began to speak. And, eventually Perdita began to write down her messages. And all of her messages can be found at wayoftherose.org.
And people often ask sort of reverentially, like, what an awe-inspiring experience it must have been for me. And to be perfectly honest, I must admit that I was a little bit more like Bernadette Subaru's mother.
Yeah. I was like, what?
No.
Yeah.
It was a really rough time. Our daughter was very, very ill. She'd been sick for a year. The doctors told us that something was terribly the matter, and we were going to the best specialists in New York, and no one could tell us why everything was going wrong in her body. Mm-hmm. And that's a terrifying experience as a parent. You're just beside yourself.
Yeah.
And in the midst of all that, we had lost our main freelance writing client and and so I thought, I can't deal with one more thing. I can't have you
deal with a Mary apparition. Yeah. This
is not what I need. But what transformed my experience was I've been Clark's editor for years. I've read everything he's ever written, edited everything he's ever written. And he started to share with me what the lady herself had to say. Mm. And I knew my husband, I know what he's capable of. And he's a lovely poet, but he wasn't capable of this. And it was her words and her messages that for me were life-changing. And those messages are available to everyone. Many of them are included in Way of the Rose, our book, but they're also available on the website for free and wayoftherose.org. Under Our Lady Speaks, you can find everything she said. And she offers a new message on the 16th of every month.
That's what I was going to say. These are continuing for you,
yes.
right? Like this is ongoing. Well, I just, I read the book and didn't, and that was new news to me as of like probably in the last like week or so. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is still happening. I mean, when I read about it, I felt it, you sharing it just now, I was moved to tears and tingled like, it's my Western, like you said, for you, it's Buddhist, for me, it's just, I don't know what it is. It's just fear, I guess, at times to be with, but I don't let it linger too long. I let the sensation in my body, that presence, from goosebumps to tears is what I decide is real, for me. So, your experience and now knowing that I can come to Woodstock for a Mary apparition site fix. I have not been to one in the United States. So that is definitely going to happen. And I'm really looking forward to reading about it. And I think my final question, and then we're going to share where everybody can find you, because it's final question for this episode. Let me just say, not the final question, but for this episode, you speak a lot in, waking up to the dark about how we're in this time. But one thing that really, was turned on its head for me was because it's not new to me that, the divine feminine has been suppressed, and everything that was related, to goddess and all that has been, turned around and made into like evil or dark or, ugly. But the way you talk about darkness and the importance of it and how it's been treated and turned into evil, turned into, something to avoid, where, only suffering, I know we don't have time for you to like go, extensively into it, but I want to, leave us with that and have you share some about that, because, and just how our world is what it is now because we have too much light, right? And I've been catching myself and hearing when people say like, oh, the light and the dark, or the dark side or the shadow side. I'm like, it's got a bad, like, no, I just want to
One of
stand
the
up and
things
say
I
like,
try to,
something's wrong.
I want
Can't
to tell
stop.
women, and I want to tell women particularly,
Mm.
is we don't know that that's been used as a weapon against us and our
Yeah,
bodies, and that our wombs are dark places,
we're
and that
here.
that darkness within us is where life grows.
Space of creation,
It's the
right? And
space
it's
of
dark.
creation. And it's also what it means to live inside the mystery and the vast I don't
Yes.
know. And, it's a relief kind of not to have to know,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, I'm a modern person. I like to be in control. I want to drive the car.
Yes.
I want to know where we're headed and how we're going to get there. But I sometimes think what the lady says is like, you guys are like 2-year-olds in a parking lot. Just hold my hand. I can't explain this to you, but I can get you through this. But for me, that we have let ourselves be, as the darkness has been demonized, the mystery of creation has been demonized.
Yeah.
And most of the cosmos is dark matter. 85% of the cosmos is, we don't even know what it is.
Right.
The history of artificial illumination from the first, campfires a million years ago up to where we are now, where basically there's barely any darkness left in some places,
Yeah.
has been a history of conquest, right? Light is the symbol. It was even used as a colonialist symbol, right, to bring light to the darkness of the
Yes.
lost continents and so forth and so on. So there's this idea that the more light we shine on things, on nature, on ourselves, on our own consciousness, the more sort of awake we are, the more in control we are, the better we are, the more
Yep.
good or wholesome or pure or whatever. But in fact, just the opposite is true. I'm very struck by the fact that Christians, who have done probably as much as anybody else, ideologically to demonize the dark, their given name for the devil, for Satan, is Lucifer, which means light bringer. All right. So actually, the ultimate evil in Christian symbology is this figure who is an angel of light, right? And so there's this sense that somehow we're going to, illuminate everything. Everything will be known. Everything will be under our control. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
light is the great symbol of human supremacy and the domination of human beings over nature. And we know where that ends, right?
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. Just read the Bible. It's all there. The
Right.
Bible is like a thought experiment, which asks the question in the first chapters, what happens to a species that claims dominion over the entire world and redesigns it as a theme park for Homo sapiens? Where does that lead? Where does that go? The answer is Revelation, the end of the world, and the destruction of the planet.
But women had a different response. And when they developed the Rosary, it was almost an alternative to
Yeah.
that vision.
It was.
And instead of beginning with Genesis and ending with Revelations and Apocalypse, they told a story about birth, death, and rebirth.
Yeah.
And it was a world that went in a circle, just like the
Yes.
natural world. And it was a world that women understood. And that was a world filled with mystery and darkness. But if we want to see a shooting star, we have to step into the darkness. If we want to return to the land of magic and miracles, we're going to have to take our hands off the steering wheel, and not just take our hands off the steering wheel. We're going to have to get out of the car.
Yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Find a new road. Right. I think
Yeah,
you
go
say
into
that
the
in your book.
woods.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot, it's hard. It's a frightening moment. I mean, believe me, I struggle with it myself perpetually.
Mm.
And yet, there are times in our lives we have to surrender illness, tragedy.
Sure.
And then, it's just like you remembered praying the rosary for your mother's biopsy, right?
Mhm.
Like suddenly at that moment, this is what I need.
Yeah.
I am inside mystery. There's nothing I can do to control this moment. And that's what we discovered with our daughter's illness. And we went to Our Lady of Rocamadour and said, help. The doctors have no answers. The best, most wise doctors have no answers. And within a month of coming home, she got a diagnosis.
Wow.
So
I mean, to be both grateful and, as you say that, like, of course she did. I'm trying to hold that more. It's like, oh my God, thank goodness. And of course, right? When like that's possible,
it is.
It's possible. And I want to affirm that possibility as much as I possibly can. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is really hard to close out this particular podcast. But I think we touched on and covered. So now in future ones, we can go even deeper into some of these aspects. But, hearing the two of you, speak what I've been reading and, feel it and the way you embody it is just huge honor, pleasure to be with Marianne Williamson last night in my home. So we had it was beyond, right? And to share and hear her. And there was so many striking things that she said, but one that, I'm hearing, through our conversation is, the miracles don't happen with the majority agreement, right? Like a majority is never going to bring world peace, is never going to, change our country. But we do need a critical mass, right? And, the way of the rose and, aspects like that are, working toward 100th monkey of this reality, as it's so, is what I also believe is what's going to take us out of this or move us.
Course in Miracles was a big influence on Clark.
Sure was.
Oh,
and I just
taught it for a while.
Wow. I just want
Wow.
to add that Perdita alluded to this, but the rosary doesn't end the way the Bible ends. In the Middle Ages,
True.
the priest tried to get the ordinary people to end it with the Last Judgment, but the people rejected that, and so the last two mysteries of the Rosary tie it off in a circle. So you have the Assumption and the coronation of Mary as Queen of Heaven and Earth, young again with a little baby in her arms. After which the whole thing starts over
again.
And
so it is,
kind of like
basic gospel of hope and redemption and return and renewal. It's that old pattern, that the mysteries taught.
But yeah, we're going to have to find that old rhythm and that old,
yes,
and also create. Clark and I talk a lot. You tell us to shut up. A belief sphere. But I hear you talk. How do we create a belief sphere of magic and miracles? And I don't mean that tritely.
No,
I mean, we don't have the answer. I do not trust Silicon Valley to solve the problems we're facing as a planet right now.
Nope.
I think it's going to come from the radical faith of simple people.
100%. No, I'm so with you. And I love doing this because now a whole bunch more people get to hear this message, connect with you, I hope many of them, and myself included, are going to find their way to Way of the Rose. Absolutely. So can you speak out loud, even though it'll be in show notes when the episode comes out? What are the best ways to make contact and learn more and hear more?
Well, we have a website that's filled with materials called wayoftherose.org, and that will have everything from Our Lady's messages to how to pray the rosary to tons of stuff is there.
Mm-hmm.
And
how to connect with meetings.
The other thing is we also offer daily rosary circles. Those are all free, leaderless. Come bring and pray the prayers. You change whatever words you want. Meetings have different flavors, but they're all very much the same, where people pray the rosary for their heart's desire together in a spirit of friendship. And
so beautiful.
Zoom, phone, and even in-person circles are about 10 to 15 meetings a day. So you can usually find one in a time zone that works for you. If you've been to a meeting, you can start a meeting. It's very relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know
We
you're
also-
you're intentionally doing it that way, which I appreciate.
Well, our
that's
next book is called Circles Not Lines, Spiritual Community Beyond Patriarchy. So
perfect.
so we've really been trying to think about how to create really radically inclusive spiritual community that's not leaderless. No,
That is leaderless.
that is leaderless.
That is leaderless.
Not
Right?
a leader. We also have a very thriving Facebook group called
Oh,
Way of
okay.
the Rose. And that's a place where people can find support to pray the novena, inspiration, friendship,
Art,
art. A lot of people
interesting
find it.
articles. Yeah. Yeah. We have, it's
I
like,
love
A lot
that.
of people are on Facebook just to be part of Way of the Rose.
right.
Yes. Oh,
And we're also
I guess I
here
have this.
in Woodstock, New York, and the lady is right on the road, a mile from the center of the town.
Mm.
And most,
Yeah.
and
Every day there are people out there. We go to the end of our driveway
How
and
beautiful. Oh my
pray.
gosh.
on
Oh.
June 16th, the anniversary of the apparition, it'll be the 12th anniversary this year. We have a feast day here in Woodstock. We invite everyone to join us. People come from all over the world.
We rent a big tent and our whole
And we just all pray the
property.
rosary together, and there's a big fair, and we have tarot readers, and people make
Music.
Of course.
rosaries.
Yeah.
There's singing and dancing,
A
and
lot of children.
many children. And
Many children,
and
of
our
course.
goal is for the children and the teenagers to have the best time ever and want to come back. So
Then who cannot like it, right? Like who's there? So I always end my podcast with one last question, and because I love hearing, because every response, and I know yours will be such, is enlightening to me. So as you know, my platform is Rewrite the Mother Code. So what does Rewrite the Mother Code mean to you?
I sent you a quote that Our Lady said, and she gave it on Christmas. It was her Christmas message, I believe. And she said, I invite you all, male and female, young and old, to join me in mothering the world. We are all one mother of the world. And I think to rewrite the mother code is, what would it be if everyone, what if teenage boys aspired to be good mothers? Isn't that the image of Saint Joseph and Saint Anthony holding them in their arms? They're aspiring to be good mothers. And to rewrite the mother code is to make it not just biological motherhood, but what does it mean to be a mother in the world?
I think of your
Thank you.
grandfather, rosary praying grandfather, right? I think, I think for women to rewrite the mother code, well, for many women, that means becoming a mother, right? Or acting as a mother or supporting mothers. There are a lot of ways for women to do that. I think men sometimes feel themselves off to the side because that's where the culture wants to put them. Wants
Yes.
to sideline them from family, from intimacy, from tenderness, from all those sort of virtues that Perdita described in a wholesome sense as dark, right? Or mysterious or comforting, the tactile. Men are sidelined from that, but they don't have to be. And there was a great, great history of devotion going back thousands of years. All the earliest legends about the Rosary show mostly men coming to the lady, offering her flowers, offering her prayers, and performing great acts of tenderness and generosity. So I think for men, rewriting the mother code is allowing themselves to express a spirit of devotion to the lady and to the feminine.
And then accept her embrace. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a pleasure and privilege. And I look forward to seeing you, podcasting, all the different ways we're going to. So thank you.
Thank you, Gertrude.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for choosing yourself and taking the time to listen to this podcast. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother. Subscribe to Mother. It helps other people who need this message, aka all women, well, actually everybody, men included, find it. I'm honored to have you on this journey in mothering yourself. Remember, change is uncomfortable, but it's beautiful, and it starts with us. And if you can't wait until next week's episode, follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Dr. Gertrude Lyons or at my website, drgertrudelyons.com. I'll see you next time.